Hello, grade 11. This is going to be our watercolor tutorial, and we're going to be painting this painting over here. I have a couple of different versions of it. I'm going to try to bring it up a little bit for you. So this is one version. This is more of a nighttime sky. You can see that there. Here's another version where I've tried to do a bit of a morning sky, and in this morning sky I've also included the salt technique to create almost like a starry type of morning. And then lastly, a bit of a stormy sky. So 3 different versions, 3 different ways of doing it. This is a great tutorial because it covers a lot of different types of techniques, and that's why we're going to be starting with this tutorial. So you can decide what you want to do as far as sky goes. I would like you to make sure that your barn is going to be red like this, and that you're going to use yellow over here, and we're going to make some colors for the trees over here. Your sky can be a blue sky like this, with the sun just kind of setting behind us, almost a stormy, weird, tornado looking like sky. Or you can do one like this, same idea. This is more of a later night sky, I guess. Or you can do the morning sky. So in the morning sky, you're going to be working with pinks and light blues. In the evening sky, it's more going to be a little bit of yellow over here, as well as some blues over here, or yellows and blues in here, whatever you prefer. Okay, so first thing that you need to do is find a piece of board, a piece of wood, anything you can find, and tape it down. Get your watercolor paper out, the bigger one that I gave you, and tape it down really well with masking tape. And the reason we do this is because as you paint and get the sheet wet, it will tend to move in a little bit, and it will tend to contract, and we want it to stay nice and stretched. The other reason we have it on our board is because when you sit and paint, you can hold it kind of on your knee like this if you'd like, and lean it up, but you need the board because you need to manipulate the paint and where it goes. So very often you'll be doing stuff like this, moving the paint around, especially with the sky. We want to move the paint around. So that's a good reason why we want to do it in this way. The second thing that you're going to do is probably pause this video and just kind of sketch in the details. Now when you do this, make sure that you do the details straight. And what I mean with that is make sure that the silo wall over here is straight, or the silo edge. Make sure that your barn boards are straight when they come in here. The window is straight, the door is straight, things like that. Do it lightly. We don't want too much as far as too many lines in there. Watercolor will cover a lot of things, but some of the lighter watercolor shades like yellow do not cover really well. So I would go over this still, and I would just kind of erase a little bit more. I want to keep a fairly light line in here and not too many of those other sketchy lines. So I might erase a little bit in this area. Just kind of gives me the outlines, so I know approximately where I want to put things, but I'm not having a solid line all the way through. If you can notice here too with the silo, what I did is I drew the line in behind just so I could get the curve straight. So at this point I'll take out those lines that are in behind. The barn is in front of the silo. Let's take out some of these lines. Maybe just clean up this a little bit. Make sure that your page is as clean as possible. I'm also getting some smudging in here from in behind. Got some fence posts in here. One of ours shows it. I think it's this one over here. It just gives a little bit of something in the front here because it's a big wide open space. You will notice that you don't have white watercolor, and I never really talked about this in the sampler, but we just use the white paper to show white, so you will not have white watercolor as a color. There is a product called Frisket. Some of you might have used this in grade 10 if we worked with watercolor at all in grade 10. It's called Frisket, or masking fluid, and the way it works is we want to keep something very, very white. We would actually put some of that on these areas in here. We want to keep it really white. We don't have the luxury of doing that today because we don't have Frisket here. So what we're going to be doing is just being very, very careful with how we move things around and how we move our water around on our sheet. Okay, so I'm going to try for a sky something like this. I really like these colors, and I have the ability to create some of these colors with the palette that I have here. So once again, you want to have your supplies. You want to have 2 different cups of water, clean water and dirty water. I have 4 or 5 different paint brushes. I'm not sure if I'll need them all. I'm going to start with the sky, and I'm going to use my flat brush for the sky. I've also got some paint, the filbert brush here for the rounded edges, some detailed brushes over here, and then a straighted brush for some other areas. But we'll go through that as we go along. I also think it's valuable to have a blow dryer, so keep my blow dryer handy. Watercolors, again, very, very transparent. So we want to build it up in layers. The layers adds to the value. So I want to make sure that I can build it up in layers, and sometimes we're impatient, and that impatience causes us to add too much too quickly without it drying. So for example, if I was to paint the yellow in behind over here, you can see I'm going to paint the yellow in behind here. When I do that and I don't let it dry, and I mix the blue on top of it, what happens is blue and yellow mix green. So this would be very, very greenish. We want to avoid that. So we want to let this dry a little bit. Also want to look carefully at where the different colors are going to go, and also where we can use the same colors. So in order to be somewhat efficient in what we're doing, if I was doing this one, I would study it carefully and say, okay, I've got some yellow in here, that's a brighter yellow. I have a darker yellow in here, and a dark to bright over here. So what I need to do, a little bit of light yellow in this area, what I need to do then is create maybe two different yellows. One yellow that is a little bit of a darker yellow. I might have to add then tiny bit of blue, tiny bit of red in here just to darken it up. You add the other primaries to this color to darken it up a little bit, darken up the yellow. And then I want a fairly bright yellow for in the back there. But again, we'll go through this step by step. So those are the supplies. Before you begin, I'm going to begin with the yellow. First thing I do is dip in my water. I already did this, but first thing you're going to do and activate 30 seconds or so where you're just swishing around the paint. There's something about the pigments inside the paint that work best when you do it like this. So just activate, activate, activate. I just realized that it was probably super hard for you to see what I had drawn because it was very light. So I went through once more and darkened my lines, and now I'm going to erase them down. So just pause the video here to make sure that you have the actual barn down correctly. Okay, so for this next step, you have to be kind of fast, but you have to be careful. So I already did it once off video. I'm making sure I put water down. I'm being very careful to stay in the lines. I don't want water going into the silo. I don't want water going into the barn, because when I lay down the paint, that's where it's going to go. So very carefully, you're going to cover the whole thing with water, and it should be puddly. It should be wet, but not puddly. And if I look at an angle like this, I can see that it's nice and wet, but it's not super puddly. I'm first going to start by laying in my yellow paint. So I've got some of this nice yellow that I love here, and I'm just going to lay it in very, very lightly. I'm going to start behind the barn and work it up. So I'm going to take it, well, because I think I have to bring it on a bit of an angle here. So start it by the barn, around the barn, because that's where I want it the darkest. I want to be very precise about where I lay the color down. There, it can blend off. And over here around the silo, a little bit behind the silo. And then I want to start to work it in. So just going to take some water and some really light, I'm not even sure if you can see what I'm doing, really light paint here, and start to just work it in. I want it to spread around a little bit, spread out a bit from the barn. I'm going to encourage it to move here, and kind of, so it's going to be a bit of a glow that's going away from the barn. So now I'm just going to let it dry. And this takes a bit of patience, right? I just want to let it dry. It looks like it's the darkest around the barn, which is what I was hoping for. It does look like a bit of a line. I don't really want that. So maybe I'll bring that up a little bit like that, and I'll let it dry like this. So putting it upside down, and this is why you want it on a board, because it really helps you when it's on a board that you can manage the paint. And this is where you'll have to let the paint do its magic. So I might put a little bit more in here just to have very light, kind of like that gradient fill that we did. I'm only working almost with water here. Just letting it go down. I'm going to let it dry all the way down like this. I don't want big streaks. I've got almost just water at the end here, but I do want to kind of cover it a little bit as far as the color goes. And maybe what I'll do is I'll just add in, use my nice big brush here on the areas I don't have to worry too much about the detail here and about touching other areas that weren't wet. So maybe throw a little bit more pigment in there. So going back to my palette with a very, very wet brush, picking up a tiny bit of that yellow and just putting a little bit more into the sides over here. And yep, it's upside down. You're seeing this correctly. It's upside down because I want the darker colors to be in the area around the barn, and I want the lighter to go around it. So next step is going to be to actually dry this. And when you dry it, actually, what you can do is you can use the air to force the paint in certain areas. Mine's a little bit too dry to do that, but if yours is still wet, you can use the air of the blow dryer to force the paint in different directions. Okay, so the next step, I have prepared on my palette some blues. So you can see here, this is my main blue color, and I added, believe it or not, a little bit of red and a bit of yellow to this. When you add red and yellow, I'm making orange. Orange is the complementary color to blue, and it will darken the blue and it will turn it into a bit more of a grayed down, a less intense version of the blue. So that's what I have here. Also notice that I made a fairly strong blue, like there's a lot of pigment in there. It's not washed out because I'm again going to do the wet and wet technique, and that means I need to have a fair amount of pigment to wash through. Second thing, I want to put some stars in the top. So I've got my little bucket of salt here. You could do the same thing if you want. Just get that ready for when it's still wet. And then the third thing is that I've got some clean water. I'm going to strike it over with clean water. And I'm going to bring back this painting for a minute so you can see. I want to try to do a sky that's something like this. So I'm going to put the stars in the very top here. So just make it look like the stars are somewhat still in the top here, and then the sun is just kind of setting, rising, whichever it might be in behind the barn there. So that's what I'm going for. Also want to make sure that I go from light to dark. So darker on the top, lighter coming down towards the barn. And then lastly, I have some toilet paper, tissue paper, because I want to lift some of that cloud up. You can see from the example that's just in the background there, I'm going to try to take some of that cloud up and over and out. So again, want to work fairly quickly with this. So I've got all my supplies ready, because once the water dries, it's not going to do what we want it to do. So the first step is watering very quickly. Oh, and again, because mine is on an angle, I have to be careful that the water doesn't go everywhere. So I'm going to just lift it down for a minute and do it like this. Okay, so there is water everywhere where I want that blue to go. And now I'm going to start to lay in some of my darker colors, some of my dark blue. So first step, I'm just going to lay it down a little bit. Hopefully you can still see it. I'm just going to start across the top and lay in some fairly dark blues. Right, and as they come down, we want to get lighter and lighter. You can see my yellow is still in behind there, so I'm just putting some dark blues into the very top with the activated paint that we had here before. And as I'm going down, I'm going to let the water do some of this turning for me. I'm going to keep doing it. Keep working it, keep putting in some more. Wouldn't mind having a bit of a whiter area up in here. Sorry, it's probably hard for you to see it. It's just hard for me to do it in this way. So you have to bear with us a little bit while we experiment with the best way to do this. Oh, there's some nice dark. Trying to cover most of it with a little bit of a kind of covering most of it with a little bit of blue. I want it to be darker at the top, so I'm just going to right away put a little bit of a darker layer in the very top. Yeah, and then I'm going to start to let the paint do what it wants to do, which means run around a little bit. You can see I'm going right over top of the yellow here. Right over top there. Make sure all my edges and sides, there's no hard edges. We don't really like hard edges. Right? And then if I move it around a little bit, it should start to turn and to become a little bit more sky-like. So move it around. See a bit of a line there. I don't really love that line. Try to bring it up a little bit more like that. Turning it upside down for a little bit because I want to put some more dark paint in the very top, and I don't really want that to run into the bottom towards the barn. I'm going to bring that in there. I like the streakiness of it, so leave that like that. And then I'm just going to go and very carefully try to lift out a little bit of paint Just a wee little bit. So I'm working upside down now, so I have to remember where are the lights and where are the darks. And I might not like this. I'm not sure how it's going to turn out. We'll see. Can always paint over top. This is the beauty of watercolor paint. You can always paint over top of watercolor paint if you don't like something. So easy to do that. I know one of my instructors actually took a course in this before, and what she did is she just put her entire canvas, one time she wasn't happy with it, in the shower and just let it shower off, and it completely kind of showered away, and she had almost a brand new piece of paper canvas to work with. So that's pretty cool. This is a bit of a harsh line in here. Maybe I'll lift a little bit off of there. And then I did want to do some salt, so I might have to think about that. Think about putting a little bit more water into it. Just not sure if it has enough water for the salt to gather all the pigment right now. So I'll just finish this. See if I like that. I've got almost some bands of clouds happening. I like that dark stripe in there too. I might just go back very, very carefully and just darken that a little bit, add a bit more to it. The funny thing is that as it continues to dry, you will see that it will continue to start to move a little bit as the water dries onto the board. So I don't love this right here. You see this problem that we have right over here? I'm not sure if it's properly on the thing. Oh yeah, you can see it. See that problem over there? That's not really great. So I'm going to try to fix that by just going back with a bit more water and see if I can make it get rid of that line. So just scraping that line down. If you have any harsh lines like this, just scrape them down. I don't really care if I go a little further down into the barn there. Maybe I'll just put a tiny bit more pigment on this side over here and see if that helps move it up. That might look weird. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how it works out. Maybe do some horizontal stripes to kind of stop the water from getting too crazy. There we go. We'll see how that works out. Maybe I made it worse. Sometimes you can make it worse by doing stuff like that. Okay, so we'll kind of let that dry. I think I'm going to let that dry before I put the stars in because I feel like that would be a better option. Notice also that every once in a while you do weird things, like you might possibly get, like I did in the white, some of that blue, and I wanted to keep that really, really white. So I'm going to go back in and with just a very clean paper towel, and I'm just going to rub it back and forth a bit to get rid of that. So I'm just basically lifting the color back out. See, clean paper towel rubbing. Now be careful, because you rub too much, your paper is going to start to come off while you rub it. So you got to be really careful about how you do that. See if I can add a little bit more variety here. Darks and lights, a little bit more contrast. Okay, I think that's pretty good. I'm going to turn it around, see what it looks like. Yeah, it's interesting. It is really interesting. It has turned a little bit greenish, as you can see. I am going to dry it up, and I'm going to put on another coat. All right, so I have a real weird sky going on here. As you can see, it looks like it's tornado weather. It looks like it's turned a little greeny. I like this part in here. Not totally happy with this, but I'm going to see if I can kind of fix it. Just want to show you a couple different things. The first thing is that is in this one, you can see I've put multiple layers of clouds in. I actually used different colors of clouds. I let it dry and went back and did multiple layers. This is okay to do this. If you want to do this, go right ahead. But be very, very careful, because if you put in too much, you sometimes do have the chance of wrecking it a little bit. So you want to be a little bit careful with that. The other one, this one was simply done one coat, no lifting out, no stars, nothing like that, just simply one coat. Has a really nice soft finish to it. I used a little bit of Kleenex in the very center of that one, but hardly, and it was very wet, so the paint just kind of did what it was supposed to do. You can see here too that I let the paint come down into the yellow. Again, it was quite wet, whereas in mine here I tried to go along the edge of the yellow. That might have been a bit of a mistake. You might want to avoid that and just try to let it come into the yellow. I'm going to do another coat and see if that works. And also, sometimes when you overwork, like in this area, look what happens, right? It becomes really, really patchy. That would have been okay for up in here to have some patchiness, but down here I wanted it fairly smooth. So again, not quite the best thing. So I'm going to do one more coat. I'm going to see if I can make this look a little bit better. And if not, it is what it is. Sometimes these things happen, and sometimes we can change and fix them, and other times it's more difficult. So let's see where this goes. So it's nice and wet again. I'm going to start by dropping some paint into the very top and just letting it work down. So I'm going to let it work itself down and keep dropping paint in all the way through. Possibly part of my cloud is going to disappear. That's okay. Keep dropping it down. Maybe I'll make a little ridge right over here. See how that works out, and underneath this and over top of this. And maybe we'll do a little bit more underneath over here. And we just want, again, things to just move down, move down as much as they can. I'm going to add a bit more over here, trying to get rid of some of the weirdness that I had there before. We'll see how it works. So now it's just moving down into the different areas. I'm going to lift it up and I'm going to try to just move it around a little bit. So bringing it back up, bringing it across. Sometimes this works horizontally to create some really cool cloud-like formations. And then bringing it back down again. And it's amazing how the paint can work when we're doing that. See, there's a little bit happening in here. There's a little bit dry there, so I should probably go back with some clean water and just get rid of this dry area in here. And then I just, again, have this problem over here that I just don't love. So I'm just going to go back in and just try to clean it up a little bit. This is a very clean brush. Clean it up a little bit, or sorry, just clean water. See what it will do like that. Same with this over here, not loving this per se. Such a hard line there. See what will happen if I do a bit of that. And maybe nothing will happen, that's okay too. And you can literally just stand for a while and just move it around. Now it's still wet enough. I'm going to dump a little bit of salt in the very top. Might take a little extra water in the very top here. Oh, I have to flatten this for the salt. So then now I have to make it flat for the salt to work. So you might not be able to see what I'm up to here, but just a little bit on the top. Again, if it's super puddly, it's not going to take, and if it's dry, it's not going to work. You just have to kind of have the perfect in between, and you can see if it works because the salt will look like it kind of disappears, and it's what it's doing, it's just gathering up some water. So I'm going to have to lay it flat while this dries, otherwise the salt will just fall down. So I'm going to lay it flat and be back in a moment. All right, so the next step is going to be the barn, and I'm going for a barn that looks something like this. I like that barn red. It's a bit of a browny red, and I like how much variegation there is in the color. So the first step is the entire barn is going to be done with a light shade of red. How do you mix the red? Well, I have used this red over here, which is almost like an orange, right? So I'm starting to mix it up here with that red, and you can see I already started to work with it a little bit. It's too red for me. So what I'm going to do is I continue to add in a little bit of yellow. Sorry, I'm dropping my paintbrush here, making a mess. Taking a little bit of the yellow that I have, putting it in like that, and that's going to make it more orange. And if I look at it and it's too orange, I think what's the complementary to orange? And that is blue. So in order to get rid of some of the orange, I can add a touch of blue in it. Now, I kind of actually like that, but let's make it a little darker. Let's put a touch of this blue in there. I'm gonna put a touch of blue in there. That's gonna really make it dark and brown. So now I'm thinking, it's not too bad like this. It's actually pretty good. So I think I like that. I'm going to work with that color. You can see it right there. Might be a little bit, you know what, maybe it's a little bit too brown for me. I can add some yellow to make it more orange. So I'll go back into the yellow, a little bit more yellow, make it more orange. And then I'll probably add a bit more red to it because now it is turning like a light brown. So it needs a bit more red to redden it up, a bit more of that cherry red to redden it up. So I'll go back into the red over here, or into this orangey red. And I'm just going to lighten it up a bit. Keep going back and forth until you find the shade that you love. So the other thing is I'm looking at this picture here, and those areas of white that normally we would use like a masking fluid or frisket on, I wonder if I can tape them with masking tape, and I think I'm going to do that. So I'm just going to cut myself some masking tape. I like it when it looks completely clean. I'm going to cut myself some masking tape, and I'll be right back showing you the final result. Okay, so I've wet all this. So it's wet but not puddly. There's a little piece coming down there because it's on an angle. Oh, there it goes. That's bad news. Oh well, let's see what we can do. Okay, so next thing I want to do is I'm taking a very, very wet brush. Very wet brush, and I'm just going to dip it in just in the corner here, bring some of it out. I just want a tiny bit of pigment, and I'm just going to throw a little bit of light red in here. Move it down like this. Now I'm going to try to emulate the boards, right? So one of the best ways to do this probably is to make sure that I have a vertical line going all the way down always, a vertical line all the way down. So it's again a wet and wet technique. It's kind of running around a little bit. Make sure that doesn't happen. I'll take some clean water and clean that off in a second. And a little bit more for the side shed over here. Again, just have a little bit up here. I'm gonna let it run down. Avoiding, I taped off the windows as you can see, so I'm avoiding that part of it. So again, it's all about layers. So we just want to let it run around a little bit like this. All about layers. We want to make sure that we are creating a really light background. So a really nice light background. There we go. So I want to think to myself, should the main barn be darker, or should the side shack be darker? And I think that the side shack should be darker. I think there should be a little bit of a difference there. So while it's still wet, I'm just going to go back in a little bit more into the side area over here and just put a bit more paint in there, and then I will let it dry. If you can see that, if I'm not holding it on too much of an angle here. We want that to be a little darker. Letting this run up and down a little bit. Turn it upside down so I can clean off that one little spot. Again, if you have a problem like this, you just grab a clean paper towel and you can just rub it off. And again, a little bit more paper towel. Just gonna dab it in and try to get rid of those spots that I've made before they dry completely, because if they dry completely, they're hard to get off. There we go. Oh look, I have some interesting stuff happening up around the top of the barn. That's okay. Maybe I'll just pull it back down over here. There we go. That would make an interesting looking barn. So we're going to leave it like that for now, let it dry, and put on the second coat. Okay, so for the second coat, I'm dipping directly with a fairly dry brush, and I'm just brushing it down here a little bit. I want to show some of those boards. So just brushing in a very vertical way to show there's a little bit of board there. I wanted to keep a bit of a lighter piece here above the door, and then a bit of darker piece on the other side over here of the other side of the barn, where there'd be a bit of shadow from that door. And then very carefully at the bottom here, bring that up a bit. It's a bit awkward for me painting this way, so these lines might not be exactly what they should be. And now going into the little side piece over here. Okay, so you can see I put those lines in. I've used this brush. I've also created now a little bit of even a darker brown, added a wee more dark blue, a little bit of black to it. And I'm gonna go in and put some shadow in certain areas and create a bit of the board look. So one of the ways of doing that is holding my brush very, very much on a horizontal to make a nice straight line. And I want to kind of get the straight line to go all the way down like this. There we go. And I'm going to do that for more of the boards, and I'm going to have to do it on my lap for a minute because this is a little awkward without standing right in front of the canvas. So I'm going to pause this for a minute, and then you'll see the finished result. Okay, so there you can see the final barn. I used this brush. I went back and forth. I'll just show you a little bit of what I did, just so you have a hint of how this went down. And I just kind of put a little bit of extra up in the top here and brought it down very, very carefully and lightly. Bit of a shadow from the top there. And then I used my brush on an angle and just went in like this and brought some more pieces down. Don't really want a harsh line there. Same within here. At the bottom, I just turned my canvas all the way around. I find it always easier for myself to paint like this. So I turned my canvas right around, did the bottom edge, and then brought it up a little bit like that. Showing a little bit darker on this side of the post. We'll have a little darkness on this side. So we're kind of assuming the light's coming a little bit from here. That makes sense. We should maybe make it a little bit of a darker piece over here as well on this side. Showing a bit of a shadow, maybe a touch underneath like that. There we go. So that is, I'm pretty happy with that, I think. I'll leave it like that for now. And then we'll see if we have to do any more to it. So a bunch of different techniques here. Starts with a wash and wash. Then I worked into a bit of a dry brush, then took a detailed brush and painted in some of the boards. Okay, the next step is going to be the silo. Okay, the next is the silo and the light and dark areas inside the barn. So the idea is that you look through the doorway and you see some areas where the sun is shining into it and also some areas where it's darker. And that's what's creating that value. Again, we have our light coming from over here. So I also want, well, light's coming from behind as well, but I also want to show the light kind of coming from this area. So I've got a lighter streak there, some light there and some light there, as well as light in the tops over here. So in order to do this, I need to mix two different colors. One is going to be the deep blue over here, and the other one is more of a tan yellow. Start with a yellow base, and I'm going to mix it up. I'm going to start with the yellow base, but what will happen with the yellow base that makes it really great is you keep adding a little bit of red to it and a little bit of blue to it, because the complement to yellow is purple. So red and blue together make purple, right? The other two primary colors. So we want to add a little bit of each one, and just a touch, because the yellow is so very light, and that's going to give us a deeper, darker shade of yellow that we can use in this area. You can actually see the blue in here, right? Like you can actually see there's a bit of blue in there. And that's neat because it also gets the reflection of the trees, which are like this greenish blue type of reflection over here, as well as it also hints at the reflection that happens against the barn here and over here. Often when things are reflective, they reflect what's around them. So if you're, for example, you see that very clearly in a sunset when you're working with the sunset. But even in a situation like this, we're going to see some of the colors reflecting on the snow. We have that here with a little bit of red coming up from the barn, a little bit of blue coming out. And in the trees here, we also see a little bit of that. So I'm going to do the silo first, and then I'm going to do the inner spaces in these areas. So I'm going to mix some paint and I'll show you what I've got. Okay, so I'm going to put a bit of the yellow in. You can see I've already made it wet. I'm going to start on this side, just put some yellow in, going like this. So because I'm again doing the wet on wet technique, I just want to let it run a little bit. And choose it a little bit like this, let it run a little bit like that. And then maybe down like that a little bit. And then take a bit more water and then just continuing to let it just kind of like that gradiated fill that we did. I want the whole thing to fill with yellow, but I don't want it to be too crazy dark. So there we go. If you had more water in it, it might have ran a little bit more on its own. Mine didn't as much. And then same with the piece inside the barn door. Just going to throw a little bit of watered down yellow in the top here and let it kind of come down into this area over here. My light's going to go over there, and I wanted my dark to be a little bit more on this side, so I'm going to leave that more white. The window, follow the same pattern. So first job, sorry I keep moving it here. First job is going to be putting some water into the window, just make it nice and wet, and into these little guys as well. Again, not puddly, not drippy, but just a little bit wet. Mine's going to be a bit drippy because I keep holding it up too much on an angle so that it drips through. Nice light yellow, very watery yellow. Just going to lay it in right over here. Just a wee bit like that. Let it run through. I don't even mind if it goes all the way. And then in the windows, same deal. And now I'm just looking at my sample and I see I've messed up because I actually want the yellow to come in from this side. So just going to fix that for a minute. Add a bit of a darker yellow on this side. There we go. There we go. So up and down, a little bit in there, a little bit in there, in there. So that's our first coat. I'm going to dry it with the dryer. with the blow dryer, and then we'll do a second coat. Okay, so the second watering has occurred. I'm going to use a bit of a darker yellow in here. Oh, I should put it down because I probably need to move it while I do this. Turn it like this. I'm just going to lay a little bit in here. I have created some wet already, so I'm going to let it move a little bit. Looks like I need a bit more water. Sometimes that happens, it's not quite wet enough. Put a little bit more water in here so I don't get a solid line. I like the idea. I feel like it kind of follows a cross contour when I do it this way. I like the idea of it flowing into each other. I want it to be somewhat dark under this rim as well. So I'm gonna maybe see if I can put some dark and have it flow down like that. And I'm going to put more blue on this side. So I know that this is supposed to be the lightest yellow side of the silo. And it can be. I just want to get a little bit more under here. Let it kind of explode together, and then I'll put some blue in this side to show the shadow. Sometimes it also happens that we end up getting some wet areas where we don't want them. Always make sure you've got some fresh Kleenex or fresh tissue paper, fresh kitchen roll, whatever you call it, Bounty or whatever available. Put a bit more in here as well, a little bit of this darker look. And I already watered this area, so I'm also going to lay a little bit in the top here. Oh, I don't have enough water in this area, you can see that right away. So put a bit more water in this area over here. Moving it around a little bit. And then a tiny bit up in these areas over here. Although I'm just going to collect, keep moving it around, so hard for you to see. Just going to collect some of that water off the edge here because I don't want it moving back into the other area and getting too dark over there. All right, and then I want to put a wee little bit just in the top corners here. We'll start down, we'll start across, down, across. Good. Yeah, and I think that's cool. Oh, I'm gonna move it up a bit so you can see it. There we go. Okay, I put some water in the other, some more water, has a bit of a bluish tint because I was mixing with my blue, and now I'm gonna stick some blue in there. I know that's not really authentic to the way it would look in real life, but I like the color choice, so I'm just gonna go with it and see where it ends up. And it's not wet enough, so I'm gonna go back, make it nice and wet. And that might be a bit too wet. We'll take our Kleenex and pull some wet out. And then we're going to dip a little bit more blue into it and see what happens. Oh, that'll be nice. So you can see I can control it by the way I turn my my canvas or my paper. Oh, don't really want it over there. I want it more over here. So I'm going to control it like that. I got a bit of a drip here. So I'm just going to collect it again with the Kleenex. It just takes it right up. And then I want it to be really dark in the side here. So before it goes too much further, I'm just going to lay in some dark in here while it's still nice and wet. Kind of have it explode. And then have it roll in this way. There we go. Maybe a bit more in here. And then I'm going to do the same over here. I want it to be equally dark in here. Again, not enough water. You can see that's a common problem for me. It just takes a little bit actually, right? To move it around like that and just create this idea. Gather all the extra. There we go. And put a little bit more pigment in there. I'm hoping you can see this because I keep having to move and turn it. So I'm going to pull it back a little bit. This one's dried on the bottom here. Going to add a bit more again into the bottom and into the side. I want it to be darker there. I might have to do another layer on that one. Move it around. Yeah. Ah! So it's not always working out the best. I need to turn it upside down so the barn, this part of it will work, but that kind of messes up the window. So I might just take a bit of Kleenex for a minute and just pull it back out. Because this whole side was supposed to be light. And you can see just with dabbing it, I can get a little bit of that idea. Still gives that same idea. There we go. Okay, so as soon as that dries up a little bit more, I'm going to drop a wee bit more of the dark in it. This time I'm going to use my small brush. Because I want to be very specific about where it goes. So I'm just going to drop a little bit on the side, a little bit on the bottom. So the trick here was to let it dry a wee little bit and then to kind of say, okay, I want this shadow to go like this, turn it this way, let it ride out that way. And the same with this. I want this to go this way as well. Just lay a little bit more in there. And as it dries, it will continue to move and to become somewhat interesting. I'm just going to lay this on top of here. I had some red in there. So you can see I'm going right over top, by the way, right over top of the, oh, maybe you can't see it because I'm not holding it properly. I'm going right over top of the tape there. It doesn't really matter if I hit the tape because I'm going to take the tape off obviously. So I'm going to put some wet in here, wet up this a bit. Thinking again carefully about the direction in which I want the paint to move. If I carefully paint the bottoms here, and I put some water in it, as I just did, then it will kind of move up a little bit and create a shadow type of thing. Alright, so I took my fine brush, I just extended this line over here to make a nice solid line. I also put a little bit more in the sides here, and I'm liking the way that works out. So while it is still somewhat wet, and I can turn it that way, I'm now going to make this silo wet one more time. And I'm going to try, I've created a bit of a deep mustard, and I'm going to try to use that deeper mustard color in it to give it a bit of a shadow. So I'm just going to go across here with this deeper mustard color and just going to use a cross contour. Think carefully about how this is working out. It's all going like this. And we also want it to go underneath to show that that's going underneath a little bit. Just going to let it dry there. Pulling it out in some areas. There we go. I have a bit of a green line there. I don't really love that, so maybe I'll just do this as well. Okay, and now I find it's a wee bit liney, so I'm going to take water and just bring it down so I don't have all those solid lines that way. I don't really love that. There we go. And then while that is still kind of semi-wet, I'm going to go back in with just the pure straight dark color and do a little bit more along this edge. Because I just want it to drop in like that. And I'm going to go down like this. I want it to drop in this area a little bit. And I want it to go around the bottom a wee little bit to define that. Maybe a little bit back over there. Maybe just a tiny little bit along this edge. So we're getting, as it comes around towards us, it's becoming a little bit lighter, and as it moves away from us, it's becoming really dark. Now going back in my pure yellow, I'm just going to stick a very light yellow line right across here. And I still got to do something with the top of it because the top still looks weird. My idea for the top was that it should be very light and bright because it's more in the sun. So let's fix this corner up a bit. There we go. I think that might be better. So we'll just kind of let that sit for a bit, let that dry up, see how it dries up and how it looks. And then I think the top part, I'm going to have some darkness go in here. So before I do that, again, I want to do the wet on wet because I like the way that effect, I like that effect, I like the way it looks. So I'm just going to make it nice and wet. I've got the tape there kind of helping block what I need to block, which is kind of cool. And because I'm thinking the roof might cast a bit of a shadow, maybe we'll do a little bit up like that, and we'll just kind of say it's dark there, and then it will also be dark on this area over here. Yeah, that might work out okay. Might have a little bit, or it might be a little bit darker on the top if the light's coming a bit in front of us. I'm not sure if I just messed it up, but we'll see. There we go. Yeah, I think that's pretty cool. I think I like that. So we'll let that sit for a little bit and let that dry up. Okay, feeling pretty happy about the way this is turning out. You can see a couple of things here. I took a little bit of that blue that's over there, just a tiny little bit on a very fine brush, and drew a straight line down. The blue mixed with the yellow, and it creates almost a greeny type of dark brown type of look, which creates almost a bit of more of a shadow going in there. So that's where we are for that. The next job is going to be the trees. Okay, so take a close look at the trees here. You see how they're layers upon layers upon layers, and they're all different colors. So the further the layer is, the less detail. The further in the background, the less detail. So you can see the ones in here that have almost no detail. The way I did that is I used a very, very wet brush and very thin paint. And I'm using a dry brush technique at this point, right? So very wet brush and very little pigment for the back, very little bit of the color on it. Then the second row was this brown, you see over there. And then the third row was actually the blue. I echoed the same blue that I used in here and used it again over here, because I really love the way that looks. So that gives almost the feeling of depth. I've got 3 different layers. First layer, lots of water in the background, background layer. Then on top of it, a second layer that was the brown with just a little bit less water. And then finally the blue with almost no water. It's a very strong pigment. And I'm doing that all the way around the barn and all the way around the back of the barn. Okay, so that will be our next step. Okay, so I took off the tape, and I kind of like the I like the white. I have a couple of issues with it. The one is where the white, I tried to make the eavesdrop come back up in here. I think that was a bit of a mistake. I think that looks weird. So I'm going to try to get rid of that. I've got my red paint still in the corner here. Made it a little bit wet, fairly dry brush. And just going to see if I can just kind of get rid of a little bit of that. It's going to look odd, but at least it doesn't look as odd as having these pieces sticking right into my building. So I'm going to let that dry, and then I'll do a few more coats with darker and darker colors on it, using a dry brush, because then the pigment will show the most. Okay, so I started with kind of a grass green. You can see it at the very top over here. It was just some yellow mixed with a little bit of blue. And then what I did is I kept on adding blue to it, but it kept on just getting darker, but still being that grassy. So whenever you want to take a color back, you're going to add the complementary of a color. Whenever you want to deaden it and lose the intensity of it. So in that case, that would be red. So I had some leftover red right here. I took a little bit of this red, mixed it into here, and now I've got this nice color. I like this color for the back trees because I like it to, I'm sticking with a kind of bluish tinge. I have a real blue undertone to the entire painting. So I want it to be kind of bluish. And if you think about it, pine trees, these type of trees, or spruce trees, the type of trees that we're making evergreens, they're never a real grassy green like that. They're much more of a green like this. So I'm using my smallest brush, detail brush over here, small brush, nice wet, gonna make my paint nice and wet, and just basically going to make a line going down and then just back and forth like this. So now I noticed that that is not enough water, so instead it's not wet enough, it's not smudging out enough. So I'm going to actually use my slighter larger brush. Where are we? This one over here, and I'm gonna go over it. I really want it to move kind of and get really, really loose. So I want it to be very, very wet. So again, this is what we're looking for. So we have the vertical type of tree, and we want different heights, right? This is the background. We always want the little top to stick out. So this is the way we do it. Very, very simple, very easy. Straight down and then across. Some darker, some lighter. That one was maybe a bit darker, so I should probably dip in water first. Cross the edges back in my paint for a minute. And we also don't want just a straight row. We want some of them to overlap a little bit. We want to almost create like a giant idea of a background here. And the motion is almost like this, right? It's almost like that. Okay, so there's my line of trees. You can see as they dry that they're just really moving together. You can see that there should not be a straight line. Here I see they're a little bit too even. I'm just going to add one more in the background over here. Maybe a nice tall guy. I'll put him back in like that, just over top. I don't like it when they're super even like that. Put another one in there. Another one. And it's good to have some different layers. You always want to make sure also that the top sticks out because that really defines the tree. I didn't leave a whole lot of space between mine. You can leave a little space if you like that better. I do like to see a little bit of this in between once in a while, that it's not just one solid block because it still shows the shape. That's step one for the tree. All right, so my second color is this weird color over here. It's kind of a green. You can see I've got some green tinge in it. I added a fair amount of blue to it, a little bit of red to it, and now I've got this green tandy color. So it's darker because I added the blue. You see over here I started doing that, and then I took it over here and then I added a bit of red to it. So I've got that dark tone. I'm going to have a mid-wet brush. So somewhat wet, but not too wet. Dip it in my water, just brush it on the sides, dip it in here, and now I'm going to start with my second layer. So these are going to be in the front, which means they might be a little bit smaller, that's okay. And I'm not going to have them as full as what I had in the back there. So what I mean is I'm not going to put them as close together. You see pine trees, evergreen trees are really quite, in the distance like this, they're really quite easy, right? They're just kind of looking like that. So the background's still a little bit wet because I took a bit of time, but I'm doing it almost right away, so it's a little bit wet. So I want to make sure that it doesn't blend too much. I might even go for a slightly drier brush, but I think I like the way this is working out. Okay, and you can see that I've just been busy. I'm just busy doing more and more layers. I've got a light green layer in here. I might add another one. Again, just this back and forth motion. A fairly dry brush, by the way, because you want it not to, you want to show the actual strands a bit more, so you're going fairly dry here. Bring it out a little bit. I also brought one or two forward over here, and I brought some of these guys forward over here. So I'm going to do one more coat over here. Just kind of really, this idea, make it nice and full at the bottom, have the vertical spine of the tree show, the tree trunk show a little bit. And I've even got some, you see here I got some leftover blue. I'm going to kind of mix that in a little bit. Have some green blue here, see what that looks like. Oops, nice and straight down, darken up that area. And just bring out in the center a little bit more here to show that it's darker in the center. Same here, darker in the center. When you do these ones in the front, you want to stagger them. So you're going to have one, the lower one further up and one further away. The lower they are on the page, the larger they're going to be. So you want to stagger them through a little bit. Same over here. Darken this up a little bit. Darken this up a little bit. There we go. And maybe again a fairly dry brush. I've got a Kleenex back there, paper towel back there, as well as my water. So I'm using a fairly dry brush. Now kind of a bluey color. I like this color. Just going to go through, do a little bit more in here. And I also almost use a bit of a rocking motion. I'm not sure if you caught that. So straight up and down like this. Oh, it's a bit too dry. Wet it a bit in here a little bit. So my paint's getting nice and dry in here, so it helps to create a fairly good pigment. So straight up and down, and then just back and forth. And I'm using a tip, I'm just tipping it out. I want to create a bit of value here, but I also want to have some, a little bit more of a line, I suppose, in a way. There we go. And again, we want it to be darker in the tree trunk area, so we're just going to pull that through a little bit and make that really pronounced. I'll do another one over here, you can see again. And I use almost like a rocking motion. Rocking motion kind of back and forth. Notice too, when I do this, my wrist stays fairly even. I'm just using my hand going back and forth. I've kind of got myself balanced on my knuckle here, and I'm just swinging back and forth. Okay, I think I like the way that that's working out. Okay, I'm going to put in some of these fence posts in the very beginning or very front over here. What I did is I covered them with water, and I just want to do a slight, so I just dip in a little bit in here, a little bit like that. Oh, this side as well, just dip in a little bit. I think I'm going to put them on their sides so they can run that way a bit. And this one as well. And then after this is dry, I'm going to go in with a dry brush, and I'm just going to really force it around with a dry brush to create some more detail. So that's the post so far. We'll let those dry out. Right, and then we want to create a bit of shadow coming down. That snow is looking unnaturally white. So I know that I have a really light area in here, and I've got some light coming from in there. I'm thinking the sun is coming up like this. But there's also sun coming up behind the building here. So let's we're gonna have to fudge this a little bit because what's happening in the front is not the same as what's happening in the back, but that's okay. So a nice wet brush, and we're just basically going to take the water from in here and just bring it in like this. It doesn't look like much, but once it dries, it will. So just simply a wet brush, and I'm just pulling it through, and I just want to pull through a little bit, there we go, a little bit of like, just showing a little bit that there's a bit of a hill happening here. Here I'll put a little bit more, a little bit of snow. Snow is never purely white. We need to show that there's some snow happening here. Might bring it a little bit up to the front there, from the bottom stem, almost in a bit of a triangle. This one as well, here as well. So that's step one. The next step that we're going to do is we're going to do the same with these pine trees over here. They're still a little bit wet because I haven't spent that much time letting them dry. So just pull them up like that a wee bit. Maybe in here too, we're going to have some stuff happening. And then this blue, this is fairly dry, so be careful. I have a fair amount on here, so I'm going to take a bit off by dipping it back in the water. I don't want too much. Just want a bit of a blue shadow coming through like this. Just going to take it around, down like that. There we go. Okay, and then also the reds. So clean, nice clean brush again. Dip it in water. It's just plain water. You see there's no color on it at all. I'm just going to go into this red and just see if I can just pull it forward a bit more. Now that's helpful if we've made any mistakes, right? Helps when you can kind of pull that red, the mistake that you've made, or a little bit that's swept forward, you can pull it forward into the snow. And snow is like that. Snow will reflect whatever's near it. So in this place, it's going to reflect a little bit of this blue. In this case, a bit of the red. And then we'll do the silo as well. And we'll just pull a bit of the yellow out of the silo. I'm going to go a little higher, but I just want to pull that yellow down like that in this area here. And then same with these posts. They'll just have a tiny shadow at the bottom like this. We'll just pull that down a bit. I've still got a bit of that yellow from in there. Pull that down like that. There we go. So now we've created some snow-like things happening in here. I like it a lot. I like it when it shows a little bit of this happening, because the snow is never pure white, so that helps a lot to make that a little bit more clear. Okay, and then lastly, I put these posts in. You can see I put a little bit of got a bit of dark on here, really dark brown. Put a little bit of dark in there. Oh, going out of it a little bit. Oh no, this is not good. These things happen sometimes. Don't get too concerned if they happen. Just try to straighten it out. Well, that's a kind of a giant post. That's okay. A little bit of dark in here as well. A little bit of dark in here. I'm going in with a fairly dry brush now because I want to add a little bit of shape to everything. And you can see I did the same thing here. Very light, and broken lines happening in here. It's just to kind of show a little bit of this barbed wire idea, or just wire going through and kind of falling down into there. And over here, it's going to come across over there. So broken lines, never whole lines, just very fine detail. I'm going to darken this up a little bit because it's supposed to be the darkest side over here. Put several different colors in here, and I'm just outlining. And while I have this is a very dark green, brown color. While I have this going, I might just do a little bit of tipping out in here. I'm just adding a wee bit of value, a little bit of darkness. These trees are supposed to show some branches, so this is the way we can do it. And finally, the last part over here. Hopefully you can see that. I always think maybe I'm too much in the way. So I will continue to do that a little bit, and I'll show you the final result. All right, so that's the final. I've taken off the tape. just because the tape leaves a nice clean edge. Make sure when you tape it that you do that you leave a nice clean edge. I added a little bit more value in here. You can see I added a wee bit more in the trees, went back with a very dry brush and just dry brushed it out. Also did the same around the barn. Look at those dark lines around the barn. Again, just dry brushed it. Added a little bit of dark line just to create a bit of structure. You can see it. I'm going to put this back down for a minute here so I can point. You can see it in the edge of the fence posts here, in the trees over here, and also right over here, as well as over there and underneath. And that's it. So that's it for the tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. Have fun.